Hello and welcome. My name is Thomas Kevin Dolan. I'm the writer and author of Little Fag, A Journey of Self-Acceptance and Healing. And today I'll read chapter 15, I Became His Target. It begins on page 95 of my memoir. My perpetrator knew my sexuality. He knew I was a little gay boy. He also knew it was my secret. He used my secret against me. He would whisper, "Don't say anything, you'll regret it." He would whisper, "Don't tell anyone. This is our special time." The abuse was terrifying. Yet there were times when I liked it, I felt chosen, I felt connected. Such is the nature of sexual abuse. Such is this double-edged sword for a gay boy. I'm saying something now. I'm telling someone now. Perhaps this will soothe my shame. What I braved. I remember it being around 11 p.m. in April 1992 when the phone rang. I turned to a dear friend who was visiting and said, "I don't like late night calls like this. With the Dolans, it usually isn't good news." As I picked up the phone, I heard, "Is this Thomas?" The person's voice asking the question sounded terrified. I realized quickly it was my older brother's girlfriend calling from Victoria. Her breath was labored. I said, "Hello. Yes, it's Thomas." Quickly she shared, "Your brother attempted suicide earlier today. The doctors don't think he'll survive." I took a deep breath, and suddenly it dawned on me that I was not surprised. Earlier that day, I listened to an answering machine message that same brother had left. It simply said, "I'm calling just to tell you I love you." This was my parents' fifth child. He was gorgeous. I watched him with all his young male friends growing up. I made up a story that he was gay. He loved the spotlight. His sense of humor was astounding. His athletic prowess was stellar. I always sensed a deep-seated anger about him, layered with sadness. I really wanted to love him, but he scared me. I hadn't had anything to do with him for decades, but I took the time to call him back, getting his answering machine and leaving an identical message. His girlfriend, crying hysterically, said, "I have no idea what to say to him." She shared that his eyesight had already gone and he was into what the doctors called successive organ failure. She felt he wouldn't last long. I remembered reading an article that stated hearing was the last sense to go in the dying process. I quickly told her so and suggested, "Talk as if he can hear you, even if he's unconscious." "What do I say?" she asked. I remember wanting to scream. "Why do I have to tell you what to say?" I suggested she tell him all the things that would remind him of how she loved him. Tell him he's okay to go, that you'll be with him. Invite him not to fight, and it's time for him to rest. He'll hear every word you say, I assured her, and hold his hand. I closed. Just before she was about to hang up, I was moved to ask her if she'd deliver a message to my brother. She gently said, "Thomas, of course." I quietly asked, "Would you please tell him that he is loved and that I love him?" I heard a faint yes, and then she said, "I'll call you when I have more news. Goodbye." My older brother terrified me for years, first as a young boy and then as a junior high school aged young adult. I didn't know about grooming. Child grooming is befriending and establishing an emotional connection with a child to lower the child's inhibitions with the objective of sexual abuse. He did this with me. Even as his brother, it always felt strange. Trips with him, even to pick up pizza, were very scary. It took a long time to figure out his ploys. There were even times when I felt I was given up to him by my mom. The phone rang at 3:15 a.m. I was now alone in the condo. I knew, this time for sure, the news wasn't good. I heard his girlfriend share, "He's gone, Thomas. His kidneys, his lungs, and his heart all shut down." I was silent. His girlfriend asked me, "Did you hear me?" "I did," I replied. "Thank you for calling." She quickly shared, "I told him what you asked me to say." I remember my brother telling me he wouldn't live to be 40. He had just taken his last breath at the age of 39, 2 months prior to his 40th birthday. I traveled to Victoria to support his girlfriend in arranging the funeral. She and I had never physically met. We had only spoken on the phone a few times. As I walked out of the boarding lounge, I made my way to her. She was shocked that I knew who she was. I said to her, "Your energy is so easy to feel. Thank you for loving my brother." We embraced and cried together. What I braved in this transition of my brother's, my perpetrator's life, was honoring him by helping the people who loved him. It was the most I could do. The loss of my brother, under any set of circumstances, would have been difficult, and suicide adds another layer of grief. The trauma had serious impact. Sadly, at least as far as I know, none of my family reached out for any support to manage their grief. His suicide was never spoken of. I've learned that grief is a process of healing with no set time limit. I found others who have been through a suicide death. It was immensely helpful. And those who have lost someone are often left with many questions and a feeling of isolation. Not everyone knows what to say after a suicide death, so there can be some social withdrawal as well. While the loss cannot be erased, healing can occur. Reaching out was a powerful balm for my healing. I sensed from my family, as bereaved individuals, the process of healing got stuck and perhaps included intense, unrelenting longing, ruminations, avoidance, and other feelings and behaviors that resulted in an inability to get back to the business of life. That dynamic is called complicated grief. As I stood over his body at the funeral home, I leaned in and said, "I trust the choice you've made to leave will serve you well. I wish you peace." The unlearning. I was raised in perhaps the most unforgiving family in Calgary. Amidst the brawls that ensued between mom and dad, all I listened to were the transgressions that each committed against each other. The ending to all the yelling and fighting was always, "I'll never forgive you." So my teachers around forgiveness were unforgiving. I knew I had a lot of work to do around forgiveness. The whole idea of confession via the Catholic Church always seemed a little strange to me. Whispering my sins to someone in the dark that I didn't know, and then being asked to say 10 Hail Marys, and I was off scot-free, seemed a tad creepy. Add to that the real sins, at least as determined by the Church, would never be spoken of on the inside of a confessional. If mom and dad were not fessing up, it would be a ghost of a chance before I would do the same. There were a number of the Dolan family who spent time in prison. My older brother, the perpetrator, did time in a federal institution. He was given permission to attend the prayer service for our older brother, who was the first Dolan to die in 1988. I remember a non-uniformed guard with him all the time and was told another was escorting him, but I never saw the second guard. Another older brother told me during the time he was out on a pass for our father's funeral service that he was arrested in a hail of gunfire and was very dangerous. Sadly, the danger part was not news to me. Long after Dad's passing, my brother got out of prison. He had served his time. Mom had invited me to Easter dinner at her place that year and failed to let me know he'd be there. I guess he had learned how to cook while in prison, and Mom suggested he prepare Easter dinner. It was 1991. I had recently come out. I arrived and saw Mom shocked to see me. Every good sense in me told me to bolt, but something inspired me to stay. As I walked into the dining room, I could see him in the kitchen, and his back was to me. He was busy cooking. Mom stared at me when I looked at her and mouthed, "What the hell is he doing here?" She raised her index finger to her mouth and returned a shushing motion. The elephant in the room shall not be named. As I arrived, the water was running in the kitchen sink. I don't think he heard me come in. I went to sit down in the living room, and something compelled me to walk towards the kitchen. I could feel my heart begin to beat faster, and fear resonated in my stomach. To my surprise, he met me at the kitchen door. Our eyes locked, and he reached his hand out to shake mine. I stepped back, extended my hand, and shook his. It felt strange not to hug another Dolan, but it felt safer not to hug this one. His eyes were a gorgeous blue, just like our dad's. For a moment, I was transfixed and then remembered the stare he had employed many times to lure me in. It was then that I looked away. I awkwardly said, "I don't remember you being so skilled in the kitchen." He replied, "It's amazing the skills you can learn while in prison." He added, "I was able to gain my cook's certification and thought Mom could use a break." Without hesitation, he grabbed my arm and said, "I've heard you've come out. I can only imagine the amount of courage you needed to find to do that. Congratulations on being so brave. I'm proud of you." My reply was short, "Thank you. I appreciate that." He didn't let go of my arm, which unnerved me. His head dropped, and I listened as he cleared his throat. I remember thinking, where is everybody? There's usually a crowd of kids at Mom's. I needed them to interrupt this reunion. Please, someone step in and break this up. With his throat cleared, he fixed his eyes on mine. They were tear-filled. He uttered, "Please forgive me for what I did to you. I'm so sorry." Terror flashed through my body. I remember being stalked, being groomed, being set up by Mom, being used by him, and never being able to tell anyone this secret. Who would I be if I didn't hate him, or if I suddenly had my passion for never forgiving erased? All of this was available if I forgave him. His hand dropped from my arm, although it seemed like it took forever. Suddenly, now, I was holding his arm. There was something brewing inside me, and I had no idea what was about to be unleashed. An energy began to emanate from my heart. It was a place I was just beginning to learn how to honor. The members of ACOA group talked about living from the heart. I mustered the courage to look my brother in the eyes. Although he still appeared as my perpetrator, I heard myself say to him, "I forgive you. I completely forgive you." We both took a breath, and he returned to his duties in the kitchen. We never hugged. What I unlearned was that some people are worthy of forgiving. I shattered the Dolan chain of forgiveness and created freedom for myself. All of my pain had nowhere to go. I didn't need to point it at my brother. I had released myself from being his victim. Although our connection never grew, I would eventually be able to say, with tremendous gratitude for my bravery, that I had forgiven him. His message on my answering machine in April 1992 and mine return to his on the night of his suicide would be the close to our relationship. In our own ways, both of us were free. I don't know about you, and if you have had this experience of a death by suicide in your family, my heart goes out to you. Choosing to explore the dynamic of that was not something a part of me wanted to do. I think with the release of him from the physical realm, I had expected that all that had occurred between him and I would somehow also get released. It never did. So I had more work to do. But the foundation of my work was the realization that while he was alive, while he was still on this planet, and at that Easter dinner, I had two options. I had two choices. One would be continuing to be a victim and not forgive him. And one was, and although at the time I didn't know it was me stepping into the realm of being brave and vulnerable and living within and under the guise of being somebody who forgave, I didn't know that was one of the options. Because remember what I was taught, right, by the family was to be completely unforgiving all the time. So this was another one of those shifts for me that would utterly change my life. And most importantly, it was another opportunity to recognize that there are times when circumstances like that never come around a second time. Right? Had I not done my work around forgiveness by forgiving him, and ultimately I had done some work around forgiving myself, it wasn't my fault. But had I not made a choice in that instance, he would have taken his last breath, and I wouldn't have had an opportunity to actually forgive him. And perhaps this will seem strange. And yet, if you understand the philosophy that I live by, it won't be a big surprise. Life happens for me, not to me. Here was an opportunity that was really horrendous, right? That sexual abuse was really complex for me as a little gay boy. But here was an opportunity to embrace my brother as a teacher, that he would teach me how to forgive, that I would be a student of his around forgiveness. I would bestow my forgiveness onto him. That, for me, is the bigger lesson. And you know what I'm most proud of? I never missed it by being able to say to him, I forgive you, because if I had not made that choice, he would have taken his last breath, and who knows what I would have been left with. Regrets, but then again, too few to mention. I have none.